And closed captioning is available. I'm Maureen Guarcello, Director of Program Evaluation, Compliance, and Assessment at San Diego State University. On behalf of SAAL's Professional Learning and Development Committee, I'd like to thank you for joining us today for CAS as a framework to guide your decision-making and intentional practice. And this is thankfully a continuation of our April work, where we're trying to give folks the opportunity to depersonalize. It's all personal, but it's not personal. So to use a little bit more objective decision-making in their work. SAAL and our committee are committed to involving, featuring, and representing diverse perspectives and identities in our offerings to meet your professional development needs, now more important, perhaps than ever. And it is also a free resource, which is wonderful. You can help us achieve this goal by submitting a structured conversation proposal of your own. So if you feel inspired today, please do speak up, reach out, and share your knowledge with this community as well. More information can be found on the SAAL Structured Conversations page, and we'll add that link to the chat. And during this presentation, we invite you to participate by asking questions, sharing comments, and providing feedback through the chat function that we'll be monitoring. To get us started, please do put your name and your role in the chat so our presenters can get a sense of who is in the audience today. We always love to know who you are and have you be able to speak up, certainly through your questions, but also to let us know who's out there today. Okay. Oh, and somebody disabled that noise, so thank you so much. Unless my brain shut down that portion of the chime. So thank you so much. Please join me in welcoming our presenter from the University of Kentucky, Dr. Dan Bureau. Dan, oh, all right, here we go. Dan said to say this, so here it is. I'm doing this. Dan is old enough, surprisingly, you would never know by looking at him, to have worked more than half of his 53 years in the setting of higher education, which is just remarkable. 27 years to be exact. He has worked in multiple functional areas, but is currently finding joy as the Associate Vice President for Student Wellbeing at the University of Kentucky, a role he has held since January of this year. He spent 5 terrific years directly overseeing student affairs assessment efforts at the University of Memphis. He's a published author, many of us know his work, and has presented on numerous occasions, especially about the Council for the Advancement of Standards, an organization he served for 17 years, including 10 years on the governing board, with 2 of them as its 9th president. In its then 40-year existence, it's now 45 years young. He loves him some SAAL and is so proud of the organization's growth and development over the last 16 years. So without further ado, it is my pleasure, truly, to introduce Dr. Dan Bureau, Associate Vice President for Student Wellbeing at the University of Kentucky. Take it away, Dan.
Thanks, Maureen. Thanks, Cindy. Appreciate all of you being here today. It means a lot that you would choose to spend the time, the next hour with me talking about something that I hold very dear, and that is CAS. And also in this community of our SAAL colleagues, an organization that I came up through 14 years ago when I was trying to find my way as a new assessment director at the University of Memphis. You all really have been just such a great force. And I just want to thank you all for the work that you're doing on behalf of this organization. CAS and SAAL are certainly in a very good place together. About 2 years ago, we formalized our relationship. And as a result, CAS and SAAL are able to work closely together in order to benefit the field of student affairs assessment. And again, please go to the SAAL website, view the benefits that SAAL members receive as a result of this partnership, and just grateful that we are able to work so closely together. I want to thank and recognize also Renee Delgado-Riley for the work that she's doing as SAAL chair and working closely with CAS among other student affairs assessment organizations in order to better the field for all of us who are doing the work in one way or another. So, today we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of CAS and decision making. And what that really means in terms of functional areas, even at the division level, institutional level potentially, I'm hoping that you can leave here with some strategies that are beyond just thinking about program review. Now, many of you might have a very robust program review model on your campus. Great, that's awesome. But I also want you to know that CAS can be used for many more things other than just program review. So, and I apologize for anything in the background. I'm at, University of Kentucky is tied to our hospital. So you might hear some sirens back and forth behind me. I'll do my best to drown them out with some really high quality educational content today. So I'm going to start off with a story because this weekend I found myself at one of my favorite local breweries. We just moved to Lexington 6 months ago, and we've already found community in a great neighborhood. We were able to buy a house. It's really close to the things we want to do. My kids can do gymnastics and ballet and all that stuff right around the corner. And also right around the corner is Twin Brewery. Now, Twin also has a pizza establishment attached to it too, or a food establishment. And early on, when they first launched it, it got a lot of bad rap. It had bad service. And you can see on the screen here, they've actually kind of embraced this idea that early on their reviews were kind of like, what is this? Right? Quite possibly the worst pizza I've eaten. And I thought that was kind of interesting when thinking about what I was going to do today, because I think it's important that organizations, that businesses examine what it is that kind of is the public perception around that organization or that business, and then find ways to improve. And this is a business that's working really hard to improve. They've been very transparent about it online. But another organization that's working hard to improve is the Council for the Advancement of Standards. It's interesting because CAS has been around for 45 years. People recognize our name. I hope many of the folks on this call recognize us as an organization that's been contributory to higher education. Certainly, you might know us for standards, our self-assessment guides, those kind of things. But throughout our history, as well as people have perceived CAS, these last two bullet points on the screen have always been something that I keep going back to as what can we do to help people recognize that CAS is not unmanageable. It's not this massive undertaking all the time. And this idea that for by and large, most student affairs folks might not find these tools applicable. We at CAS are really taking that to heart, and we're trying to find ways to make these more and more easy to use for the hundreds of campuses that do use our products. So I think what's important, though, is that in terms of tying it back to today, I'm going to talk about CAS in lots of ways that is not program review. It's not self-assessment. Because I think that when we dive immediately into that part of CAS, implement CAS in that way, it becomes a little bit of taking off more than we can really handle. That whole metaphor of like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, which hopefully the screen you can see here, it's actually a metaphor. Please don't eat elephants. But the reality is that everyone jumps into CAS and they're like, oh, we're going to do this massive program review and all of our departments are going to like it and it's going to be easy to implement. And I know people don't say it that way, but because we haven't laid the groundwork with some other strategies in order to help people understand CAS, we haven't helped people understand why these tools are helpful for them. We haven't created that buy-in. Sometimes it feels like we are just jumping in and doing this. And so one of the most important things I hope you take from today is I'm hoping that you can take CAS, make some decisions around its use, and then start creating a culture where CAS is understood, it's embraced even, right? It's a part of the culture, whether you're looking for evidence or assessment or continuous improvement, whatever it is that you're trying to do, it's really important that CAS becomes part of the culture first before you launch into some kind of comprehensive way to implement it. And I think that's where we find ourselves in that place of like, what does this even mean for me? Am I doing this to be performative? Does this have any real benefit to me as a functional area lead or a divisional lead? When really what we're talking about here is a framework that can be used for almost any level of decision making within student services by and large. Quick shout out to this book. It's about 13 years old now, but hopefully all of you have this on your bookshelf. It is a publication from NASPA. It was one of the earlier forms of good student affairs assessment kind of guides, if you will. This was about a culture of evidence in student affairs, but ultimately I've used this book to just kind of frame how I have discussions around culture building at large, including for CAS. So tying back to the idea of decision making, in the April structured conversation that Amy Carlson Welch from University of Georgia and her team they put on last month, which was a great way to examine how decisions can be made using this framework that's promoted in the Decision Matters book. Decisions Matter is another publication from NASPA. Also a great read. I've used this a number of times throughout the last 10 years. It came out around 2015. And it's been a great read for me and very applicable in the student affairs assessment area. What I'll say here is that I'm going to lean into phase two, this kind of comprehensive kind of examination of the options you can use in order to apply CAS standards in this case. So kind of so far, I've talked about this idea that CAS can be seen as kind of overwhelming. It can be used in order to create a culture of continuous improvement, evidence building, those kinds of things. And it's a great tool in order to make decisions in how we create, implement, assess, and then improve student services in the higher education setting. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about kind of the origin of CAS and the modern day function of it, and then provide you all with some insight as to some decision-making processes you might use to implement CAS in a number of ways and build that culture. Please do ask questions in the chat as we go throughout today. I know that Maureen and Cindy are monitoring the chat. They will let me know if there's a question that comes up. There will also be some time at the end for me to answer some of those questions also, but I'm going to go into about a 5-minute overview of what CAS is and kind of what purpose it does serve. We just had our 45th anniversary, as Maureen mentioned in the intro. We currently have 41 member organizations. We have 52 sets of functional area standards, anything from admissions to residence life to most recently, we created esports and basic needs. And it's been wonderful to watch over the last 17 years that I've served on CAS, the kinds of standards that we have been able to revise and reaffirm, and then also the new ones that we've created. College Stores, also, I see Jeff Nelson's on the call here, our representative from NACS. College Stores is another one that we just recently created also. And so what CAS uses is a consensus approach in order to create these standards. There are representatives from all member organizations, up to 2, and we come together in order to develop and review standards. We bring in external experts. So for example, right now, we're working on some transfer student services standards. We brought in experts from both the ACRO and the National Institute for the Study of Transfer Students in order to create those standards, and we're working on finalizing those, hopefully for release in early 2026. But we use that approach from both the internal to CAS because we know how to create CAS standards in the way that honors the framework that we've developed, but also we want to have experts from the different functional areas come in and help us create an idea of what really are the good practices in those areas. And we also have some cross-functional frameworks I'll talk about towards the end. And those are models for how you might be able to implement a comprehensive approach to a particular challenge, such as well-being or first-year experiences. Our mission is to advance student learning and success through uniting higher education associations in the use of professional standards for the development, assessment, and improvement of quality programs and services. And assessment's only one part of this. Even in our mission, as we exist as an organization, we do promote this idea of using our standards beyond just the assessment of the quality programs and services. We want to help people create ways to structure and design programs and services. We want to see them improve them over time in order to better serve students, better serve our publics. And so certainly as an organization, we exist for far more than just self-study, self-assessment, and program review, though that is a part of it. And I'll talk more today about how you can make decisions around how you might structure that as well. Even that doesn't have to be as comprehensive, depending on what you want to achieve from it, as many of us make it out to be. All of our standards have 12 sections. All of them have the general standards, which cut across all 52 sets. So the really neat things about CAS standards is that you might sit in the room and you might be doing campus activities, and across the table is someone from residence life. And what you can come together on is this idea that we have shared standards. Our sets of standards for both campus activities and for residence life have more things in common than they have separate, but they do have things that are unique to those functional areas as well. All of our standards in the within the 12 sections, everything that is a standard is in bold, and everything that is a guideline, which is kind of a recommendation, a way to amplify the standard or to demonstrate a way you might implement the standard, is not in bold font. And so our standards are really useful across functional areas. All of them address these 12 areas. And you might pick one or two sections and just dive all in. But ultimately, end of the day, the benefit to CAS, in my opinion, is always that we are going to be contributory to all aspects of a typical division of student services, student success, student affairs. I'd also say that while we talk a lot about assessment, and I want to shout out to my colleagues at University of Alabama. I mean, I worked at LSU. I will still give some love to Alabama for their wonderful model they have here for continuous improvement. But, CAS is not just a tool for assessment. And I'll talk more about that later because we're actually an assessment of the assessment, but that's super meta, but I'll get there later on. But I want you to think about us as continuous improvement so that it's more than just the assessment, but it's the review and the planning and the implementation and the ongoing attention to good practice, right? And as you think about decision making, that's going to come up throughout this cycle. The model from the book Decisions Matter is really useful in all four of these stages. But as you're trying to tailor your strategy, there's lots of decisions to be made. And I hope that today's content helps you make decisions about how you might infuse CAS into your overall strategy for decision making to, lead these divisions and these departments that you lead. I think it's important that we look at CAS as a way to ground collective purpose. Okay, so I'm kind of transitioning here into some of the ways that the many uses of CAS, kind of how you make decisions around that. But I hope that you've heard so far that there's a level of grounding our collective purpose by using the standards, particularly if you're implementing a model where multiple departments are using it. There's so much opportunity for synergy, for collaboration, when you do it in a more intentional way. I think today you're going to hear me talk a lot about you build culture through intentionality. You make decisions that allow for intentional application of whatever models you're going to use, right? And so I think it's really important that we are not only clear on our purpose, but that we're intentional about how we do it, because ultimately we have to be, really good stewards of our resources. So that intentionality really helps us, and CAS can be a way to do that. I think personally that going back to that early feedback about sometimes the CAS can feel burdensome or overwhelming, it is when you first start, but you build competence and confidence over time. And I think once you apply these things and you attend to them more than just through a once every 5 years program review, I think you'll see your team, your staff members become more and more clear that this is really a good tool for me to revisit for my own professional competence, for our department annual planning, those kinds of things. I think if you're able to, look at CAS as a tool for culture building and decision making, you're also going to be able to be more responsive and be more proactive in terms of how you could, manage your resources, apply your time and energy. And then end of the day, we hope that as you implement the CAS frameworks, that you're able to apply the standards in the different ways that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, that you can ultimately elevate the objectives and outcomes of all of your programs. I think this is a terrific tool for you to do whatever you need in order to enact really outstanding programs and services, and not just focus only on doing that as a result of self-studies and program reviews, which I'll talk about more about later on. So let's go. I'm going to talk about some of these bullets, and I'm going to do it relatively quickly, but these are a number of ways that I think you can use CAS. And another great book you might want to look into is the Using the Professional Standards book, again, through NASPA. Lots of promo here for the NASPA bookstore, great stuff there. But this is another great resource. But on the right side of the screen, you'll see the listing of different ways that you can use CAS. And I hope that as you're thinking about these options that you can consider by using the Decisions Matter model, you might be able to figure out how you can apply these in your own settings, okay? So I'm going to dive into these now. The first one would be to design new or reimagine existing kinds of programs or services. And, some of the decisions that you'll make in this space is what are the best approaches to those new or reimagined programs or services? One of the things that we often use as an example is many times you'll see that like leadership programs are part of a larger involvement office, or campus activities is part of a larger involvement office, or fraternity and sorority life part of a larger involvement office, right? On some campuses, you might pull one of those out in order to create its own department. Using our standards to look at them and say, okay, these seem pretty useful here. Maybe these 4 or 5 different standards here we're going to focus on as we implement that new office could be a way that you actually do implement or create that new department. But also, how do you allocate the resources to achieve those goals? And to some extent, it might require rethinking as you design new or reimagine existing programs or services. And so I think it's important that you think about this as CAS as a tool in order to prioritize, what you want to do with the different reshaping, reimagining of departments. So as a result of using CAS, you might be able to prioritize specific sections. On a previous slide, I talked about the 12 different sections. Maybe what you do in order to launch that department is you look at section 2 programs and section 8 collaborations, and that's what you focus on for that first year of launching. So that's an example. You can also determine the time frame for your priorities. What's urgent versus at some point. Nothing in the CAS standards says do this right now, or the police come, or something bad happens, right? Like there's no crises to implementing our standards. If you were to pick the standards and say, yeah, I'm going to do these 5 things for the next year, that's using the CAS standards in a way that makes sense for you. I think ultimately, as you create new programs or reimagine existing ones, using the standards allows you to engage in shared visiting, especially when you're talking about from a divisional leadership seat you might be sitting in. What can you do in terms of looking out across the entire landscape of the services you provide and to apply the standards in a way that makes the most sense for the resources you have to launch this new or reimagined program. So in summary for this use of CAS, if you want to be really intentional and build some culture as you're launching a new program or you're reimagining an existing one, you might be able to simply review the standards, figure out what in there makes the most sense for you to implement during that first year of launch. And that's really the nice and easy way that you can go about doing them, about using them. For this example, another way that we talk about using the CAS standards would be for developing learning and development outcomes. I'll be honest, I've been a little bit skeptical about how learning outcomes are still showing up in student affairs work right now. I think since COVID, I've got a little bit of like, maybe we're not as focused on this. I'm hopeful though that we still are attending to what it looks like to frame programs we deliver in ways that truly are learning centered, truly are about helping students learn, develop, grow, become, develop a level of competence, all those kinds of things. I know that student success outcomes are very important right now. We're really concerned with retention and graduation rates, career outcomes, those kind of things. So really, as you're considering the use of the standards, you might be able to look across the entire landscape of a division or even multiple offices, that within multiple functions within a functional area. Like going back to the involvement example, if you have leadership activities, fraternity and sorority life kind of in that portfolio, what would be shared and distinctive learning and development outcomes you might showcase in those areas? You might also look at this in terms of the what should each functional area be known for? I would never recommend the model where every department leans into all 6 of our domains of learning, development, and success outcomes, right? What you might want to do is figure out these 5 in this division are going to be really focused on these couple of outcomes, these domains, and these 5 over here, these domains, whatever model you have. I think it's important to kind of showcase how learning can be distributed across an entire division, and the CAS learning development are a great way to kind of frame all of that. And then also, how do we prioritize resources in general? If you really are going to lean into development and learning outcomes, what would it look like to do that? How could you invest resources? What matters the most? And then making decisions about how you back that with the resources that you have. So as a result of using the CAS standards, for the simple function of determining learning and development outcomes, you would benefit from using a common framework, its shared language that you could have across all functional areas. We frame them into 6 domains that have dimensions under them. Those domains could be the buckets of learning that your division holds up, and it'd be consistent with the CAS standards. You might figure out how different departments might lean into 1 or 2 areas. Again, going back to this model of what do you do over here in residence life? What do you do over here in esports or in basic needs? And then you might also, as similar to the first one, you engage in a level of shared learning. So in thinking about this from this idea of building culture, what happens now is that you're able to gain clarity and enhance understanding of objectives, outcomes, and how you allocate resources simply by reviewing and starting to implement the CAS standards in a way that frame the work that you're doing. They also allow you to increase the shared understanding of each other. I will tell you, as an associate vice president that has a portfolio of 6 departments, I need them to understand how each of them benefits uniquely and distinctively, but also how they do it together. And more right now, our ability to collaborate is key to the work that we're doing. And so as we clarify priorities using the CAS standards, it's going to help us better collaborate across departments, across an entire division, across an institution, no matter how you apply these. So now I'm going to dive a little bit more into using this in order to measure effectiveness, which is really where a lot of people kind of lean into. I do want to talk about this, though, from a way that might seem a little bit more culture building versus just launching into a program review model. Many people ask me if, well, would you require CAS in terms of doing program review? I think the short answer there would be depends on what you want to do as an institution, depends what kind of commonality you want to achieve. But whatever I would say is that you have to build up, you have to ramp up to launching a self-study and a program review model that works for the institution that you're leading. And I think it's really important that we are really thoughtful about how we enact those processes. So these 6 questions right here might be helpful for you as you're using the CAS standards to launch your own self-studies program review model. So what are the reasons that you're measuring? And I think starting from here might help you figure out to what extent you need to go to do the deep dive for self-study. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But if you're measuring for accreditation purposes, maybe you might need to have more of a deep dive or maybe not. The second question there is, are we measuring or are we evaluating? CAS is truly a form of evaluation in that we are looking at industry standards and comparing how an entity, in this case a department, would bring forth evidence of their contribution to achieve those standards. So really you want to figure out, are you measuring program effectiveness or are you evaluating how a program contributes to learning? They're not mutually beneficial, but I'd encourage you to think about what ends are you working towards here? And that can really frame how you implement your self-study, your program review model to measure that effectiveness. The third one to me, I think feels so compelling, and that is, what do we lose or gain by doing this with a level of intention over time? And what I mean by that is, I go to the Association of Fraternity and Sorority Advisors meeting every December. I am fortunate to be appointed by that organization, the CAS, and have served on their behalf for 17 years. Again, remembering how CAS representatives are appointed by their association. And I almost always get the question of, well, my VP told me they want me to launch this and do it in 3 months. Or I go to NASPA and talk to a audience of student affairs assessment folks and AVPs, and they're like, we're going to launch this in 2 months. And I'm always like, no, that's not the way you do this effectively. Now, there are models you can enact in that period of time, but in order to make the decision about what you really want to do and the outcomes you want to get, you have to determine to what extent this is going to be a quick kind of snapshot versus a more intentional deep dive that might take a little bit longer to do. And I always encourage folks to go more with that deep dive over time versus doing it nice and quickly. And I'll talk more about that in a second too. I talk some strategies around using this for program review. I also think it's important that as you measure effectiveness, as you use the CAS standards for measuring effectiveness, you're also thinking about how you can use this in a timely way. It might be that you're implementing this over a course of 1 year, But as you're learning things through the process, I would hope that much like in kind of an action research ethos, you are starting to implement some of your findings almost immediately. I feel like you just can't wait on some of this stuff. So whatever model you're using it, even a short-term kind of quick dive versus a long-term deeper dive, start using what you're learning right away in order to improve the programs and services that you're delivering. It's important to make a decision around how you'll handle the results. What's the reward, accountability, or improvement processes that you're going to enact once the program review is done? And then what does it look like to enact good planning for enhancements and success? What does good planning for enhancements and success look like in this area, in the functional area, but also in our division or institution? I have done a number of program reviews where I've been the external person coming in to assess the alignment between the department and the CAS standards. And what I often find is that you have well-intentioned people, but what happens over in this department might need to be acted upon differently than what happens over in a different department. And so whatever model you're using, it's important to know that in some functional areas, you might have to reward, hold accountable, or convey expectations for improvement differently. And then also as a result of that process, you might need to plan differently based off of resources and staffing models and kind of where that department might be in its kind of season of enactment. So, as a result of using CAS in this way, you can understand the value of measuring and evaluating these departments. You can create common language and approaches. I think there's a lot of benefit to having a common approach to enacting self-study. It doesn't always have to be, though, the one-year process or the deep dive. It can be different ways to implement that. It's important to lay the foundation for common planning across units. And it's important that we invest all in the success of each other. What I have seen in some of the best models out there for program review, and I will hold up UT Knoxville, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and Melissa Brown's model any day. What she has done there over, I think, 7 years now, is to start creating culture in departments. And I was able to do a program review for a department 5 years ago, return there last fall and see what they had done as a result of that program review, and then help them plan for the future. And so I think they are seeing that happening across departments. They're seeing that happening in really amazing ways where they're investing in the success of each other in order to improve the overall division. I'm putting this up here for just like a quick moment. This is the CAS recommended model we use for program review, but I think it's important that we consider how CAS as a model for program review can be that deep dive or maybe a shorter model or whatever you need as an institution. It's important to be intentional, but it's important to create the review process that you need to be helpful in your context. And these slides will be shared with everyone after the session today. But I think it's important that you figure out, like, how do I make this work with the resources we have in the time frame that we need? And as we look at the next slide, I'm going to talk to you about one campus I've worked closely with over the last year that has done this in a way that really is intentional, and uses their resources. So I think it's important that you create the model that works for you, because institutional fidelity really does matter for you, right? So if you're going to use the CAS standards for program review, you might need it to be consistent across all departments. Okay, so set up the process that you need and create understanding, buy-in, and skill sets. I mentioned already the robust program review model that Melissa Brown has at UT Knoxville, but I'm working with Lisa Fowler and her team at Red Rocks Community College in order to implement CAS in a way that's best for their resources and what they need. What they have done over there is they're taking 2 sections a year and doing it across all their departments. Melissa does every department 3 or 4 a year over a 5-year period. Over at Red Rocks, they're applying this in a way where they're doing 2 sections across all departments at the same time over a 5-year period. So you can see some of the ways you might slice and dice it based off of what your resources are, what you are able to do, what kind of culture you're trying to build. I think it's important that you implement this in a way that's really reflects your divisional priorities. Melissa's reason for using it at UT Knoxville might be different for what Lisa's doing over at Red Rocks, but they're both going to have important outcomes in that they're creating a culture of using CAS in order to improve the products and services that their departments deliver. It's always important to have realistic timelines. So as I said before, you could go really deep and take the entire year, which would be the way I recommend if you're doing true to a program review. Or it might just be that, for a couple of months, you're taking those couple of areas and you're reviewing it as a team. Again, creating the model that works for you. And I'm happy to have conversations with folks, but, going back to this kind of model that we have here, you might be enacting this, but actually going back and forth between steps, depending on what it is that you need to be most impactful or helpful for your setting. You really do not have to do it all in the same way. And I think ultimately, when you're doing program review, you should emphasize this idea that CAS is a common framework that you will make decisions around resource allocation, those kind of things across all the departments because you've been that intentional, you've worked collaboratively on things. So I think it's really important to emphasize that whatever program review model you have, you're making decisions around this idea of coming together and sharing resources and being more effective and being more efficient. And ultimately, I think that's one of the best kind of outcomes of the whole process. So if you're thinking about decision-making and building culture using CAS, and you're looking at this idea of examining effectiveness, I want to emphasize that this can be a way to build a culture of trust. And I think you have to help people understand why it is you're doing this, that you have faith in them to achieve it, that there's not going to be accountability if something goes wrong. I think being clear from the get-go about what you're going to do as a result of findings in a program review environment is really important in order to build that culture of trust. I think that what should happen when departments go through the program review process using CAS or whatever, I think it's really important to say, okay, we're going to take this and we're going to build from it and we're going to grow, and here's our time frame for doing that. I don't think that the findings in a self-study should result in accountability. I think what they don't do as a result of those findings in a year from then might be when you start talking about accountability, because you want to start laying the foundation to take what you found through self-study and to improve. And I think you're always going to find areas to grow. But also it's important that you give them the resources, the support that they need in order to start thinking about ways to more strongly infuse the CAS standards into the day-to-day work after they're done the self-study process. All right, I'm still working through kind of going back to that slide that had the many ways to use CAS. We're talking here about addressing a divisional challenge, figuring out some ways to work on cross-departmental needs. If you're thinking about using CAS in this way, it doesn't require you necessarily to go through a self-study or program review. This is a tool that I have seen folks use. And again, going back to Melissa at UT Knoxville, she's able to take all the program reviews that they have done over time and able to see where across departments are there common issues we have to tackle. And she's able to work with the leadership team of that division in order to say, hey, here's the 3 or 4 big problems that we see that have emerged. Let's figure out how we can start tackling those issues as a division, right? But even sitting down and looking at the CAS standards and saying, hey, here's the standards we really want to work on as a department. Section 2 is program. Program tends to be the longest one of all of our functional areas. Saying, hey, here's the 5 things we really want to work on in order to kind of tackle this broad challenge we're seeing as a division or as a department. It's a good place to figure out, like, that's where you start. That's how you can use them to plan, whether you do self-study or not. I think after reviewing the standards, you might see what challenges and opportunities rise to the top. There could be an activity where you lead a number of departments in kind of a nominal group technique, where basically they might vote on which of the standards they're going to really get behind and focus on for the next year. That might allow you to see some synergies across departments. And then also realizing, what really matters to us most as an institution. How does our division contribute to the processes we have? I mean, the standards are informed by experts in functional areas. They're informed by the 41 member association representatives. So these are good practices that we all should be working towards. they should also be something that really helps us as departments, as divisions, demonstrate how well we can contribute to the larger institution at which we work. So as a result of using CAS in this way, you can create those shared goals. Again, looking back at the program section and figuring out like the 5 key things we're all going to work on, that's a way to say, hey, we're all in this together. These are all things we're working towards. You can figure out that by identifying what really matters to the institution, to the division, to the departments. And then I think also using the CAS standards, because I mentioned before how there's much more in common across these 52 sets of standards than there is different, it can break down silos. So there are departments where you need to share resources, share ideas. The CAS standards could be the framework that you're all working on in order to kind of achieve that kind of synergy across those departments. So I'm kind of nearing the end here, but what I'll wrap up here in terms of this specific aspect of using the standards around this addressing divisional challenges is that challenges are going to pop up and they could potentially disrupt culture. And sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad. But ultimately, the standards can be a way for you to tackle those challenges. Whatever those challenges might be, you might find some kind of path forward by implementing some kind of, by framing the standards in a way that become part of your annual planning process, those kinds of things. I think that also if you want to implement CAS in a way that really builds culture, you're looking at ongoing attention to these things. So as you ramp up towards program review, there's going to be a process where you are actively helping departments review them, understand them, talk about them in ways that feel practical and helpful for the work that they're doing. But it can't really be only about one tactic. I think going back to the feedback about CAS, it always feels unmanageable because it tends to be something that is forced on people as a result of program review versus starting from a place of like, hey, these standards are helpful for your day-to-day practice. Why don't you just review them and talk about the ways that you can apply them in your work? And then lay that foundation for a period of time and then build up to that program review model. Again, it's going back to that idea of like trying to eat the elephant at one bite at a time, right? And I just think that when people tell me that CAS feels hard, my question is always, what made you feel that way? Almost always this was forced on me. I didn't have buy-in here. I didn't understand it. And no one talked to me about the ways that this could be helpful. It really became just an approach that my student affairs assessment person forced on me for something. And I hope that looking at this list right here, you can see some different outcomes from using the standards, not only from a program review model, but from having departments just use these to frame their ongoing work. I didn't talk about this at all, but the one bullet there in terms of devising staff development, I have seen departments use this effectively to actually frame their professional development for the next year. So in that case, 12 sections of CAS, maybe a department felt that they were kind of weak in the area of law, ethics, policy. So maybe that department might go and enact a professional development plan where they are actually attending to, learning around law, policy, and ethics. And so there's really good ways to use this that are beyond just the program review self-assessment models. I'm going to stop now. That's 45 minutes of talking. My head's spinning because I said so many things. I know there's probably questions in the chat. I want to hear what those questions are and respond to them the best I can.
Thank you, Dan. And I'm going to point your attention to the chat because Anamaya has a kind of a long one. I'll let you, oh, there she is. She's got her camera on. Would you like to share your question out loud?
Sure, thanks, Maureen. Hi, Dan. Thank you so much.
See you.
Nice to see you. So my question is on the new rating scale, because we went through one review for our campus recreation department since that standard was, or that SAG was new.
Yep.
And they had a really difficult time with the rating scale, the compliant, not compliant, insufficient evidence, since there isn't as much like range.
Yep.
And so now I have another department running into the same issues. I'm wondering if you have any like expert advice on this, because when they're going through, the standard as a whole, those sub-bullets have really helped with the rating overall and the justification. But sometimes, like, you know, some of them are compliant, some are not. Is it like, okay, if one's not compliant, you're not compliant with the whole standard? Or any advice on how they can navigate this?
Yeah, I have two thoughts on that. And I think I want to start with the if you're not compliant on one thing or you're not compliant overall. I think that that has to be set up institutionally specific. And I think that it should not be about compliance or not, but about like how the non-compliant areas become an area of focus for the future. We actually had a lot of feedback about our scales, and we went with that model because people were so much in the weeds of like that separation between the meats and partly meats.
Yeah.
And we thought it was important that people, and I think even in the setting of using, I know the scale might not be might present some challenges. But I think in that setting, you might talk to your campus rec or your other department about, okay, you landed on not compliant, but are there places that you can build on for the future? Or are you not compliant because this is something that's not really important to you right now, or it hasn't been a priority, and does it have to be? And I think that when you're looking at it that way, and maybe the compliance language is a little bit jarring for some folks because, there's no CAS police, right? There's no one telling
Yeah.
you that like you're going to come in and we're going to bust you for not doing it. But I think that what you all can create internally, you're at USF, right?
I'm at University of Tampa, but yeah,
I'm
Tampa.
sorry about that. At
No, no
Tampa.
problem.
But in the context of at Tampa, maybe the discussion is, okay, well, these conversations around compliant or not really should be about priorities or not. And
Mhm.
when you're seeing not compliant, but still a priority, that's a different conversation than not compliant and not a priority. Because I think we have to also let go of the fact that every standard is essential and every standard is equally important. They're all there because experts have reviewed them and identified that they can be standards of good practice. But in University of Tampa, maybe they're just not priorities right now, and maybe that's why they're not compliant. I think them asking themselves, why aren't we compliant, is probably a better question than trying to figure out like, you know, oh no, we're not compliant. Well, why not? Let's figure out a way to either fix that or make that a priority or not.
Thank you. That's helpful.
If that's not helpful, please get back to me. But I think that we did that because people specifically wanted to get away from that like scale. And but always welcome the feedback if there's some, you want to have a conversation offline about that.
Yeah, and I appreciate too the kind of the even the wording is a little bit more jarring.
Yeah.
It feels that way with it being, instead of like meeting the standard, the compliance piece has thrown some, not just our divisional leaders or our department leaders, but also our divisional leaders a little bit. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to help people understand that sometimes compliance, yeah, is about priorities, not necessarily like accreditation kind of compliance.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you.
thank you.
What other questions do folks have? I know there are some folks in here that maybe aren't in the student affairs space, and potentially this is a new overview for you. We find that in the institutional effectiveness space in particular, CAS is not well known. And we're trying to do more and more in order to get into that space. We have a few folks. I think Dan Kazmarek is on the structured conversation today. He and some other folks are presenting at AALHE in a few weeks. Might even be this week. And to talk more about how to use CAS standards in the IE space as well.
Dan, I have a question. This is
Yeah.
Maureen, San Diego State. How are people tracking all of this? How is Melissa Brown at Knoxville doing this? Are these drives, docs, portals? What does that look like technologically?
Yeah, I mean, they use a platform there, yes. And it really is systematic. It started off as Google Docs, then they were using I think what maybe using Watermark now. They've used Campus Labs, Baseline in the past. I'm not sure quite the name of it right now. I think there's been some changes there. But yes, there's different ways to manage it. I think it's important to create the structure that works best for you all and is most hospitable and helpful to the people in your environment. You can do that on the very low expense. I'm sure you can upload folders. So for like program review, you might have the Department of Residence Life. You'd have a folder for all 12 areas. You upload the evidence into that, and then you evaluate that using the self-assessment guide. But in terms of doing that more formal process through self-assessment, that's how you might structure it. But in all honesty, for many campuses who just want to use CAS in order to frame day-to-day practice, it's just simply having the standards. It's simply having the self-assessment guides and revisiting those periodically. They're having discussions at staff meetings. They're having discussions at division directors meetings, those kinds of things. And so I can do a whole separate training just on how to structure a program review. And Melissa Brown's a great resource for that. But it can be as simple as using resources you have all the way to having kind of an assessment platform comparable to ones I mentioned, Watermark, et cetera.
Thank you.
I'll watch the chat for a few more questions. I know we're wrapping up on time here. I wanted to go through a few things. There are a number of resources for CAS, and SAAL members benefit from the partnership with CAS, and I'll explain that more later on. I'd encourage folks to have our version 11.1. Back in the day when CAS was a book, we would publish every 4 years. We have moved to a digital model, and now we put that out on an annual basis. Now, we did not have one in 2025 yet, but we did in 23 and 24. 24 is a version 11.1. This allows us to bring forth the standards that we revised during that year in a more timely way than have been in the past. And I think it's important, those that subscribe to CAS, and I'll give you information on that in a minute, our subscription model allows you to have access for 1 year to all the resources that we published during that year, including our cross-functional frameworks. These can be really helpful as we're helping departments implement strategies around specific problems or challenges we're facing. I, as an AVP of Health and Wellbeing, have found the Advancing Health and Wellbeing very effective. There's many frameworks in that space. This is one way in order to implement a cross-functional framework to health and well-being within your institution. We have a number of resource papers as well as a using the CAS standards to build a culture of assessment resource paper that could be very helpful for folks. And these all talk like big picture how you might use CAS standards in order to achieve these things, regional accreditation, or to acclimate graduate students to the field. We also have a compendium of contextual statements from all 52 functional areas available at no charge for graduate students that you can access through the CAS store as well. You can see here, going back to this website, the screenshot of the CAS-SAAL partnership. There are a number of benefits here, but one of the ways that SAAL members benefit is by receiving a discount on our CAS subscription, which is not provided to anyone else in any other setting. So SAAL members benefit from that only. We give discounts out on our products, but typically they do not involve the subscription model, but SAAL members do. So if there's any other questions you have, there's my email address. Our CAS website is listed there as well. There's a discount code that you can use through June 2nd. Just use that SAAL0525, and that will allow you to get off that 25% off of all the resources. What I hope was achieved today in the last 50 minutes of me talking with you is some understanding about how CAS can be used in ways that are pragmatic and allow for capacity building. They allow you to think creatively and intentionally about how to implement programs and services. There are ways that can be easily brought into a team and become part of the culture for that team. It's not only about self-assessment and program review, It's really about building a culture of thinking intentionally and creatively about how we do the work we're going to do. And I think that the CAS standards can provide that for any of our 52 functional areas, just by simply reviewing them and talking about them as part of your team, as part of your division. So Maureen, I know you have a couple things to wrap up on. Let me see if there's any other questions. I'm happy to entertain any more questions or just turn it over to you where you can wrap up for the day.
Thank you, Dan, so much. Yes, it looks like QuanFan is, like many of us, Department of One, scrappy and steely all at the same time. So you might have an opportunity to connect. This was, I mean, for me, and I see we've had anywhere from 45 to 50 folks on the call throughout this past hour. It was therapeutic, generous. We so appreciate the expertise. I feel
I've never been
invigorated
referred
and
to as
excited.
therapeutic. That's very funny.
It feels, it
It
feels
was a
very
lot, I
possible,
know.
Dan.
Yeah.
It feels very possible.
I love it.
And we really do. And I'll ask for folks to join me in giving you a round of applause, virtual applause, Dan, for sharing your expertise and your insights. For those of you who are inspired and want to take this back to your teams and say, look, there's a thing for the thing that we're all trying to do. The recording, the slide deck, and the resources will be shared and available on our website. And conference season is in its warm-up phase in June. And so we want to make sure that we accommodate as many of you folks as possible. And so we're looking at some dates in late June to be able to hit the mark where you aren't overwhelmed and you can be able to participate. Don't forget, you can also submit a proposal to present, and you can find more details at the link that I posted in the chat. So thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you in the future. We have a couple minutes, and Dan and Cindy and I will hang back for those few minutes, and then we'll be on our way with our day as well. Thank you so much, and thank you. We do appreciate the CAS partnership. SAAL appreciates it, and we really are excited about moving forward. Have a great day, everyone.